Okay, Tara, go ahead. We're going to go ahead and switch to the next slide. So some things that we're hearing as counselors, this is what it sounds like when we lose someone, not someone, just when we have a loss or something changes. We lost the game. The line is too long to see Santa. I lost my library book. I didn't get the solo. And so you can read through some of those. I'm not reading them all to you, but it's more of just those negative thoughts that you're going to hear. And it's just hard to listen to. And right now, especially with COVID, we're hearing, not getting to do my group work. The labs in science class aren't happening because we're not allowed to do interactions, or just different things like that. Does anybody want to share anything that their kiddos are saying, or even that you're saying yourself? Because this one is really a session that you can relate to as well, especially this year, just with so many things that have changed, and just our new normal has changed as well. Anything that y'all want to share that you're hearing, or you can just even type in the chat some things that you've said or your kids have said that you're just noticing.
I think the holidays looked so different, and just missing, and the change of not having as much family around, and things just look so different on big things that are usually a big part of our life. And it's hard with COVID impacting those special occasions.
Yeah, that's for sure something I hear from kiddos. I was talking to a kiddo that just moved about 2 years ago, and they didn't get to go to where they lived before, and no family got to come for Christmas. So on top of, just not being able to go on vacation, that was just really hard for them as well. Not being able to participate in athletics. Oh yes, big one right there, especially if they're athletes. And that having surgery for sure. All right, Tara, go ahead and switch me.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. So I'm still, only 6 years into this parenting thing. I'm also an educator. So I teach university level. So I deal with I can speak to my students totally different than how I can speak to like this little person that's in my screen right here. This is my 4-year-old. So I can be real with my students, where I can tell them, hey, you're paying for this college. You need to be here every day. Our 6-year-old is really not understanding failure. Like, we go to basketball at the rec center every Thursday, and if he doesn't make the shot or whatever, or like today he got in the car and totally broke down because he had, he didn't finish his work in class. And so what do you say? I'm just looking for advice. Like, what is the best way to try to get them through, all of these things that you put up on the screen, and the failure, that sometimes we're not going to make the basket every time, or things aren't going to go perfect every day. So I just have a hard time, because I can speak to my college students one way versus how I need to speak to a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old.
And Kimberly, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Tara, if you want to answer something, but you definitely have led us to the next few screens for sure. Tara, do you want to say something before?
No, we can get there, and then we can definitely circle back to it. I'm Tara Teague. I'm one of the counselors also. And we can come back and touch on that too, even specifically for that age group, about sharing your calm, reflecting their feeling, like meeting them right where they are, and, oh man, you were so disappointed. You thought you were going to do better. And then, so reflecting that feeling with them, and then sharing your like calm and confidence, because we're their regulator, since their regulator is not internal, that, the adult is the regulator. And for those little tiny humans, they are looking to us for what their internal dialogue becomes in the future. And so we can definitely circle back, but we'll get to it in some of the slides, but we can talk specifically about that age group too.
Yes, and so the next slide is kind of exactly what you were saying, Kimberly, are we gonna fix it? Teague, you got it? I think she forgot she's the share. So what is our first reaction when they say something like that to us? Do we immediately jump to fix it or make it better? Most moms, we want everything in our kids' lives to feel good, and we want to jump to that. The problem is, go ahead and switch to the next one. Why we shouldn't fix it, and why we shouldn't necessarily jump in. And that's because our children are still developing. And like Tara was saying, they don't necessarily have that skill to regulate and to know how to cope. And so you just kind of helping them walk through that. Like if we take away, let me use this as an example. Sorry, I'm like all over the place with my mind because you had a great example there. I was talking to my sister this week, and she has a 10-year-old who is super gifted, but he's also super sensitive. And so she is a nurse, and she's been leaving to go to work early, and her husband's at home having to get him ready for school. Well, that just rocks her son's world, and there's 5 kids, so it's not like he is the main priority. However, because he has a certain routine that he needs to follow and mom's not there, she gets calls on her way to work or whatever. And I told her it's like taking the pacifier away from the baby. She's not there. And so he's going to learn how to cope without her there. Because once you start taking the pacifier away from the baby, you don't immediately fix it, but they learn how to self-soothe and they learn how to adjust their everything they're doing. But if we're always right there to pick up the pieces, they lose that opportunity to grow. And there are going to be times when it is just too much for them and they're not in a place where they can grow at that moment. And so you may have to step back. But for, most day-to-day activities, if they don't make a basket, if they lose the game, that's a learning opportunity for them. And so if we immediately go in there and talk to the coach and tell them how horrible they are, we're taking away that opportunity. Like up here, we're robbing them of that self-soothing ability, the problem-solving opportunities, empathy for others, those coping skills. So we really need to be careful of jumping too quick. Even though our mama hearts want to jump in, I know I have a teenager right now, and there's been lots of times when she'll tell me something's going on and she's in tears, and I've had to go to my room and cry to myself because I want to jump in and fix it, but I know that's not the best thing for her. She's going to have to work out that friend issue on her own. I'm not going to call the other parent and jump in, and so we just kind of have to watch taking over too much responsibility and trying to fix it too soon. Pierce, it's all you, babe.
All right, thank you. When we talk about, I'm Laura Pierce, by the way, sorry. When we talk about loss and grief and change, lots of times the things that come to mind first are those like really big moments, like the death of a loved one, or the loss of health, to where somebody is battling something that is really impacting whether it's our family unit or a friend, or even like the loss of our family structure the way we've always known it through a divorce. Some of these really big events. But as y'all have kind of already brought up with some of the examples that you've talked about, there are other kinds of loss as well. So if you'll look on our list here, is there anything that either really resonates with you with something that you're going through right now, personally, or somebody that is close to you, or something that's surprising to you, that you didn't really think of it in the context of a loss? So our list here is moving, the loss of a job, failure at an important task or project, home or property destroyed by a natural disaster, hospitalization, separation of family, divorce, death of a loved one, loss of a precious keepsake, move of a friend, growing up, aging. Is there anything that is a little bit of an aha moment or something that you really connect to on that list? So just looking at the chat, I see that Sarah had talked about that her 13-year-old is an athlete and due to an injury isn't able to participate right now. That's, even though we don't maybe think of it as grief, it is definitely a loss, because that's probably a group that that her teenager identifies with. It's a passion that he's probably put a lot of time and effort into. Also, even just the loss of like future plans. You know, we know that sometimes for these people, athletics is their lane and they have plans of going all the way through high school, maybe even to college. Maybe they have hopes of scholarship money at some point. And to kind of reframe the future, if it's something that is really going to make a change there, that's definitely something that is a loss. And so as we move on through the presentation, and we in a couple slides, we're going to be talking about like the stages of grief. And so some of that, you're going to see some correlation with things that are beyond death. I think when we think of stages of grief, we immediately jump to somebody dying, which is of course something that you're going to experience, the stages of grief. But you're going to see some of those same emotions through other losses as well.
I was going to say something about the athletics part, because I feel like for teachers, like teachers say, I am a teacher. My husband who works in IT does not say, he doesn't identify in the same way. He says it's something that he does and not someone who he is. And so for a lot of athletes or for people who participate in different activities, they identify as that activity. So I'm a basketball player, I'm a baseball player. And so they identify as that. And so what we've seen some in COVID is like with the loss of some of those activities, the kids' identity has been a bit gray. Like they haven't really known how to identify what they do with their time or who they spend their time with or how they fit in their group, because they identified so strongly with those activities they participated in. So it was this little side impact of the loss that we've had in COVID.
That's a great point, Tara, that this is really, and this is honestly the reason that we chose this topic, is because we felt like it was really relevant to what so many of us have been experiencing, all of us have been experiencing through these unprecedented times. One thing that I loved from this list is when it said the loss of a precious keepsake. You know, talking about just the range of stages of life. I mean, with some of our younger ones, something like that is really special. I don't know if any of y'all have seen on social media with like people have left like a stuffed animal on an airplane, and the links that people are going to try to post pictures and spread the word and reunite these people with these special little loveys. But it's because people understand that there's like real feelings connected there. And so some of these are things that maybe we don't come to mind at all times, but every stage has different levels of loss. So for the next slide, y'all are gonna have to bear with me because I love an object lesson. They're my favorite. But if you can see me in my bubble, or if not, Tara can put a picture of our little family mobile on the next slide there. But with a family mobile, if you can see my little visual here, if you think about it, the idea of a mobile, like something that would hang above your baby's crib, is it has to be in balance. If everything is in balance, then it's going to spin and everything is going to stay the way we expect it to be. But when we experience a significant loss, like something from the list, and a piece of that is removed, whether it is through a family member no longer being with us, or whether it is, you know, something else from the list, what happens is the whole thing gets out of balance. And it's going to impact the entire family, whether we're talking about somebody very young that maybe can't quite conceptualize all that's happened, or somebody in high school that really has a deeper understanding of all that's happened. The whole thing gets shifted because our family unit is kind of out of whack a little bit. It's out of balance. And it's going to take some time, but the way that it works is everybody has to adjust. Everybody has to adjust their role and find a little bit of a new place in the family to be able to regain that balance. So anyway, like I said, I love an object lesson. And I just thought that was a really neat illustration from our curriculum about just the significance. And again, that's not something that happens instantaneously. It does take a little bit of time. On the next slide, it is going to mention the stages of grief. So you've probably heard about the stages of grief before: shock, denial, anger, guilt, despair, and depression, acceptance. I think one common misconception about the stages of grief is that people feel like it's linear, that you just move through the stages from beginning to end, and then you've completed. You're done with your task, and you are healed, or you're restored, or you're back to normal. What we know about grief, though, is that it's a lot messier than that. It is not something to where it's the same for anybody. It's very personal, and there's a lot of bouncing back and forth. Sometimes we're progressing through stages and we have a big setback and we bounce back, and it looks more like a messy ball of yarn than it does a really neat tight circle. And so with when we think about the stages of grief, is there anything on that list that you feel like that again is resonating with you, and something that you feel like that your child is dealing with at this moment? Or any stories that you want to share? Natalie, I see you in the chat. Do you want to unmute?
Yeah, I just said, for me personally, since April, I feel like I've gone from denial to, okay, acceptance, I've got to have a positive mindset, back to despair, back to acceptance. So I feel like that is a lot of just personally things that I've gone through.
Right. If you've seen any of the memes about people dealing with COVID, which, you know, sometimes maybe that's my own denial, that sometimes I like to put some humor into this. But you can see people are progressing, and that at different times we're feeling some of these really strongly. And at other times, maybe we can have a moment of peace and a moment of acceptance, and then something new comes up. Like Cynthia, when you were talking about the holidays, I would imagine that would be a time that was maybe a setback for people, to where we were, you know, kind of getting into a new norm. And then this season comes where it's rooted in tradition, and it's all about family and togetherness. And all of a sudden we've got more decisions to make, and the decision fatigue that we all know is so real in these times. And it can kind of start the cycle all over again. Any other thoughts on those stages of grief? All right. Well, the next slide is actually talking about the stages of grief in children. That being said, a lot of the things that we read about in research as far as the stages of grief in children really are similar to the stages of grief in adults. It might just be organized a little bit differently. So like if you simplify it down to a 1, 2, 3 in that one stage, that early grief stage, it's still going to match, you know, that denial stage. That's still going to be involved in it, and the shock that we experience in the earlier stages on the 5 stages of grief. So sometimes that might look like somebody's being really alarmed in the moment. Sometimes it's disbelief. Sometimes in kids we see that as like hyperactivity, like they can't settle because they're not able to process all that's happened. And then moving on to stage 2, in that second stage of grief, we're going to see more of the sadness. They consider it acute grief. So the sadness and the yearning or longing or pining. Sometimes that's accompanied with guilt and shame. And sometimes you also, as we know, so many times when we're dealing with emotional situations, they can manifest physically. And so sometimes that's where we'll see in that acute grief stage aches and pains, and situations, whether it's tummy aches or however that presents itself. And then the third stage is the integration of loss and grief. And so that's where we finally get to that acceptance. And so other things that go along with that is restored self-esteem. Again, thinking about our example of, not making the basket or having the surgery and being out of athletics. Sometimes there's some self-esteem that's impacted with that. And so to kind of restore that, and be able to kind of be grounded in the present moment again. And just the more positive aspects of being able to kind of get back to enjoying life would be their stage 3. But as you can see, there's a lot of correlation between the 5 stages of grief and what they've done here, simplifying it to this 1, 2, 3 stages for children. And with that, I will turn it over to Tara.
Hey guys, again, I'm Tara Teague. And so in talking about like just going from where she was talking about to for the stages of grief in children, children will grieve in waves. And so you might see them playing outside and having a great time, and then be told to take a bath and have a total meltdown. And so adults, we tend to grieve in solid blocks. Like I say we carry it around like a Charlie Brown cloud. We drag our grief and our loss with us pretty present. It's always with us, and we're aware of it. Even if we can put it to the side, we're aware of it, where children can literally not be aware of it for periods of time. Sometimes even teenagers, when they're grieving something, they'll feel confused because they don't think they're doing it the right way, because at times they'll seem completely fine, and then other times completely have a come apart. But that is how their developmental brain works, that they can't stay in that feeling of loss or despair as constantly. And so for those of you, like, you've all dealt with small children who can be having a total meltdown, feel better, and then immediately be like, I want a sandwich. And you don't know how you got from like falling on the floor to, but I want cheese on it. And you're like, okay, here, we've moved on. And they've moved on in that moment because their brain just can't maintain at that level. Of course, a ton of it is normal. There is a spot to where it becomes a concern that needs more attention. And so these are signs of abnormal grief in children. Now, I will say, even if they have some of these, what's a really big thing you want to look for is the duration and the intensity. So at times, could everyone have an absence of grief or a lack of emotion? Absolutely. If it has a really long duration and they never get to it, that's something that you would want to pay attention to. So we'd also want to be looking at persistent blame or guilt of others, really exaggerated anxieties that seem crippling or give them the inability to move on in tasks, aggressive or destructive. And again, are they sometimes going to have it? Yes, but we're really looking at intensity and duration. Depression, suicidal thoughts or actions, not being able to speak about the divorce, or if there's an absent parent, a lot of dysfunction at school, assuming that they're the caregiver. So when they might become aggressive to like the younger siblings because they feel like if there's an absent parent that they now have that assumed role and they're not able to step out of that. Pretending to be perfect, being really accident prone, stealing, engaging in risky behaviors, anything that looks like addiction, drugs, alcohol, food, anything where they're trying to consume their mind to avoid having to deal with that feeling of loss. And then loss of interest, where they start to have apathy, or just being really indifferent to everything, things they were interested in that now they don't seem to be interested in. And then really pronounced fear. And that notes a pronounced fear of being alone, but just pronounced fear could be a lot of different things. Anytime they have a big pronounced feeling of fear. And then what do we do as parents? So first, we can't pour from an empty cup. So you do have to take care of yourself. As Natalie said earlier, that there are times where she's about to deal with her teenager that she has to remove herself to be able to be present with her. So she's got to step away, take some deep breaths in order to really focus on the child, because it feels overwhelming to her also to experience that loss with her kiddo. Open communication. Now with kids, we tell them what's developmentally appropriate. So what we would tell a 5-year-old is of course different than what we would tell a 10-year-old, because we're matching development with what we tell the kiddos. Using appropriate children's books, we always have references for that too. And if we don't have them at hand, we can always find them. And so if there is something that happens that you need children's books for, the school counselors are normally great about having access to developmentally appropriate literature for kiddos. then providing kids with nonverbal opportunities. And so I have a background in play therapy, and so of course I love that, but anything that involves play and connection, and where you're going for cohesion, and that can be playing board games or playing outside. All those are still nonverbal ways where they're getting to participate into things that help them feel expressive and cohesive with you. Being available, and sometimes that availability, when you guys referenced earlier about a child getting in the car being upset, like stopping in the moment and not brushing it off, not like, oh, you're going to be fine, which is true. We know they're going to be fine. Like that, we're aware you not getting this one thing right, you're going to be fine. And that can be worked in there, but of being able to say, man, that totally stunk. You worked so hard on that. I know you're disappointed. And then starting to move on from there. And then at some point you might be working in, I bet you're going to be okay. And then giving an abundance of love and affection. Anytime it says an abundance of love and affection, I don't know if anybody else watches the Goldbergs. If you've watched the Goldbergs, we don't mean that level, but she's real funny, but a lot of love and affection. And then maintaining stable and predictable environments. We know that you cannot always maintain stable and predictable. That's just not reality. That's not always going to happen. In lieu of being able to give a predictable environment, forewarning young children is often helpful if they're already anxious and they can't handle late changes to the game. Being able to say, hey, we're going to do this and this and this and this. And that's what we're going to do today. And giving them forewarning, often helpful. If necessary, you provide an outside support system. Trying to reduce outside stress, not removing opportunities for soothing, just trying to reduce some stress, and then being as sensitive and patient as possible. We all have heard the bucket theory. And so, but I have, and don't judge me before I hold up my old lady bucket of candy, because I'm deeply like a little old woman with my Werther's candies. Because my grandma loved them, so it makes me love them. And so that we know that as kids have positive experiences, they get things added to their bucket. And as negative things happen, they get them removed. We also have to know that those are resources of how the kids deal with things. So they are able to deal with things easier, the more abundant the candies in their bucket. And so we know if a kiddo starts here, with this lessened bucket, we know that it's not as easy for them to deal with things. So we are always trying to add to that bucket. With being genuine, giving some confidence, modeling how to lose. And so if kids struggle with losing, participating with them in games and being verbal about your loss. When you lose the game of Candyland, of being like, man, that was fun. Man, I didn't win. And you're getting to model and give appropriate ways to feel okay about losing. And so that is also the goal as we talk about like filling their bucket. It won't be perfect. There'll be moments where no matter how good of a job we've done filling their bucket and we think we've done this perfect job, that they completely lose their minds over something that to us does not seem to have the value to lose your minds, and that we have to stop, meet them where they are, try to understand what they're saying, say it back to them in a way that helps them understand their own feelings, bring a calm to the moment before we help them move forward, especially with the littles. Because again, the younger the kiddo, the more likely they are to use what we say as adults as their internal voice. So we might assume that they have a lot of that in there, but sometimes we have to do more verbalizations of thoughts so that they can internalize that stuff. They can come back to it later when they are struggling, that they have phrases and thoughts and encouragement that's already built up in there that they have as a go-to. And so that kind of gets to the end of the content. We'd love to answer more of your questions. I know some things came up in the chat, and so I'm going to go jump over there. Ms. Pierce was talking about for children's books, there's also many children's books written in the last year specifically about the pandemic. And so definitely there's things about that, because I can't imagine for some of our young kids who don't really understand what's going on in the world, but they're having to participate in it. They have to participate with wearing a mask. They need to participate with all of these structures that really don't make sense to them. They might need a lot of walking alongside them to help them as they try to process what seems so bizarre that none of us participated in as children.
Well, I think too, Tara, is that, you know, when I heard the parents' concerns and, you know, just thought through some of these situations, I think that a lot of the times when the kids are experiencing a change or a defeat or a loss, that their security is being rocked. Somehow, you know, it's rocking their security and their sense of self and their self-worth. And so, any way we can normalize that life is full of these ups and downs and turns arounds and all of these things, that can be a gift for us to do for our children. But on the same breath, you know, all of our kids, as you know, particularly if you have more than one kid, they're different. And what rocked one kid's world, the other kid flies through. So I think analyzing our kids' temperaments will change how we deal with our kiddos, but finding out and just trial and error of what builds our kids' security, so that I know when I make that mistake, or gosh, I didn't perform like I think what the expectation is of me, you know, that it like I said, it's going to be okay. And it just takes time to build that.
Completely agreed. My kiddos are all in their 20s, but one of them you can respond to really gently and they can take all that in, where another one responds best to playfulness. And so it almost, if someone heard it, you would almost think we were making fun of them in how we like recalibrate a difficult moment. But that playfulness is where they feel most at home. They feel most seen and loved in a moment where you're like, teasing almost, and it feels very loving to them, where the other one we would be accused of being like the worst parents, like that we would be accused of our goal was to make them cry. And so yeah, I agree, it definitely per kiddo is very different.
And Cynthia, I'm glad you were talking about like building securities. I know when I'm speaking with students in my office, sometimes when change is on the horizon and there's things that they're not certain how it's going to go, like maybe they found out that they might be moving soon or something like that. Sometimes we can, of course, lean into that and listen to their feelings. And as Tara has said, sometimes giving words when they don't have words is especially important, especially with the younger crew. But then also to focus on the constants, the things that are not going to change. Where can you find your strength and your peace? Yes, moving, but let's talk about what doesn't change, even if your address does.
Right.
You know, maybe it's the strength of your family unit. Maybe it's your values. Maybe it's strengths of your own character. Where are the things that you know that you can rely on no matter what? And sometimes it can help to bring a little bit more peace and also perspective to whatever that upcoming change might be.
Yeah, because some of the kids, even in moving, will want to look up the new school together and send an email to the new counselor. They want to start doing their own controllables, so that those things really have value for them to be able to participate in controlling what they can.
Yeah.
And now I'm
Tara.
Oh, no, I was just saying that I was just encouraging anyone who has questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. I was just going to add one more thing before we get comments. Just as you're thinking about changes and definitely like the athletes when they are getting hurt, I've got one of them that rocked our world when COVID hit, but I would challenge you to look for other opportunities for them to find hope and to find challenges. Part of the biggest thing that I see that is a self-esteem builder is when kids are challenged and either they're successful or even they're not. That's when they start feeling better about themselves because it's a challenge. It's not something easy that just comes to them. It's something that doesn't help them grow with their self-esteem, but something that actually challenges a little bit. so that they can have a win. So not necessarily just focus on, just this one sport or this one activity, but even on, volunteering at places or doing something that's totally out of their comfort zone where they grow in that. And they may not enjoy it at first, but then it's a hurdle that they get over, and then they really feel good about themselves afterward. So I would say just maybe look for ways to find hope and challenges for them with a change.
And I know you guys had mentioned some of the little ones early on. If you know that going into, like if they do play a sport or do an event, and right as they go into it, and if they do poorly, you can see it like in the stands, you see like the shoulders or like the touch of the face, like where they're expressing like, I don't like this, I'm not doing well. Preparing for it before they go into it so that they practice like their shake it off statement. I taught first grade, and we did ODRATS, which made us sound like we were straight from the 1940s. But we even snapped at it, and you'd be like, drats. And the kids would snap and say drats, but it was the way that we had like this normed, hey, look, I'm disappointed. And we acknowledged the disappointment, but we practiced it on the front end. And so you would see a kid get mad. And when I was teaching that age, and other people would say drats for them, because they would start to see the kid look irritated, and a little friend would be like, oh, drats. And because they were helping them give words to that moment that they were really struggling. And so preparing beforehand of what they say. I knew a family that before they left the house, they always said, remember who you are and who you represent. And they had said it since childhood. So in moments when they were all athletes, in moments when they were out on the court, they could look at the mother and she would mouth, remember who you are and what you represent. And they knew, okay, get it together. I've got this, I can get it together. But they had done practice in a neutral time of how you deal with disappointment.
And then on the back end, celebrating the successes. Like when you see that, oh my goodness, you missed that hoop, but you kept it together. You used ODRATS or whatever, whatever it is. But when you see those growth moments, man, all the praise in the world for those small things, because it can become patterns later. And then you're swapping, instead of the good feelings coming from making the hoop, the good feelings are coming from, man, I had self, and I was like using my good character skills instead of skills, which they're both great. I would give the point to character skills though.
Does anybody else have specific things that they would like to discuss or ask? We're your captive audience, and it's such a small crowd. You're more than welcome to say whatever you want.
Well, feel free to jump in if you were still wanting to ask something. I just wanted to take this time to thank everybody for joining us and thank our presenters for your preparation and just thoughtfulness to this topic. So we really appreciate it. I want to remind the parents and guardians that we made an intentional effort this semester to have a weekly parenting webinar. And so those are going out on the district emails. And then I believe some schools are also making efforts to get that out to you too. But you can go to our website at www.nisdtx.org/PE for parent education. And we have a whole list of what we have coming up. So what else? Last chance here. It looks like just somebody saying thank you, but any last thoughts or anybody else want to?
Well, I would like to say thank you all so much for taking the time to do this. Our family member that's in Northwest ISD, that's 7, he's dealing with a recent divorce in the last year with his parents. And you've addressed so many different topics that, you might know, but you haven't heard somebody else put a different spin on it. And I love the mobile. That was an awesome illustration. And picking him up one day in the last few weeks, he got in the car and it was you know, I'm the ride for one of the parents, you know, and on Thursdays, and he'd rather the parent be there. And he got in and he said, I wish I could stay at school. And I also realized what a blessing Northwest ISD has been to the kids that not only are dealing with COVID, but all the various other losses and things that they might be dealing with, that school is a safe place. And all of you that work with these students every day, you know, you have training, you're sensitive, and you sometimes don't know what's going on in all these little worlds in high school, middle school, elementary. So thank you so much. I really have enjoyed this and have taken some screenshots of what you've had up there to share with one of the parents, and you know, maybe both the parents can maybe follow some of the other offerings you have this month. So thank you. It's very enjoyable.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate that. And we love that grandparents join. We love that grandparents are participating, not with just us, just that you have the opportunity to participate multi-generationally close by in a time like this where the pandemic is happening, and especially like what a gift you probably are with the divorce happening and having other layers of love and support that are close. That's huge. And so thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
It is so huge, so thankful. So, all right, thanks, ladies, for your time, and everyone have a wonderful evening, and we'll hope to see you back another week. Take care.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.